Welcome into the Football Guys Fantasy Football Show. I'm Alfredo Brown, joined as always by Dave Kluge, and we've got a special guest here today. Victoria Geary is joining us. We are going to be ranking the top, guys, we don't even have a number, but I'm going to say roughly 40 wide receivers here for the rest of the season. And we do this because it helps us figure out trade values, who's going to have a great rest of season schedule, what players do we think could rise in value as the season goes on. And honestly, it's just great for us to pit our rankings against each other, come up with a consensus, and see where we differ in opinion here. So what we're going to do is we're going to work from the bottom up to the top. Let's start with the bottom tier. I'm going to list off these names here, guys, and then we'll jump into how we feel about these players. So let's start off here in the bottom tier. We've got Puka Nacua, Khalil Shakir, Jackson Smith-Njigba, Terry McLaurin, T. Higgins, Jaden Reed, and George Pickens. And those are numbers 38 through 32. Now, with all of these players, we keep getting glimpses from them that they look great. Obviously, players like Puka Nacua had a fantastic season last year, whether it's been injury or George Pickens getting big plays called back or just only getting one game of good performance from these players. We're only getting glimpses. So which one of these players are you trying to buy low on for the rest of the season, Victoria?
I gotta say, looking at this list, Jaden Reed really sticks out to me. And I know that, right, Malik Willis is there. We're not seeing that production, but holy moly, we saw what he could do in week 138 yards on just a few targets. You see that chemistry that he's got with Jordan Love. Jordan Love almost came back. Though I'm not sure if that was a little bit of a just trying to trick the other team there because we weren't really sure he was coming back from that injury this week. But maybe in week 4 here we might see him. So I am trying to buy low on Jaden Reed of these guys here. I think he just has the highest ceiling. Even just looking at, I do love George Pickens, but the target share is just week to week. You're not sure. Although we did talk about he did have some plays called back by penalty that could have been big ticket plays there. But the ceiling here for me is Jaden Reed, even though I have to give it up for Terry McLaurin last night. It was a beautiful, beautiful sight to see that man finally get some production from his quarterback.
Dave, what about you? Who are you taking from this list that you really want to buy in on?
I agree with Victoria. I really like Jaden Reed. I think the only problem is there's not going to be an opportunity to buy low on Jaden Reed just because anybody who rosters him saw that week 1 ceiling and then hasn't seen him with Jordan Love since. And I think everybody is kind of just patiently waiting for Jaden Reed to come back. But there's a few guys I like on this list. Terry McLaurin, I think that we'll see his ceiling rise with Jaden Daniels finally start to throw downfield a little bit more like we saw last night. But for me, it's my baby boy Khalil Shakir, leading the league or leading the team, leading the Bills
He's
right now.
leaving the league,
leading the team in targets, and he's caught every single target that has come his way. He scored 2 touchdowns already on the year. I know there were big hopes for Curtis Samuel and Keon Coleman and some other guys here, but it appears as if Khalil Shakir is the team's wide receiver 1. And there's some pretty big swings in my rankings when I was doing these rest of season rankings yesterday. And at first I was like, I probably shouldn't be overreacting this much after just 3 weeks of football. But then I realized all the guys that are really moving way up and down in my rankings are guys that were in ambiguous situations. And that's exactly what this Bills wide receiver room was. We kind of just clumped Keon Coleman and Curtis Samuel and Khalil Shakir near each other in drafts because we didn't know who the guy was going to be. Now, after 3 weeks a game, it's pretty obvious that Khalil Shakir is the preferential target for Josh Allen in this offense. So it might seem crazy to just say, Khalil Shakir is now moving up 20 spots in our rest of season rankings, but we were waiting for the season to kick off to get a little bit of clarity. We've got that clarity now, and I think it's totally okay to make some big swings in some of these ambiguous situations that are now suddenly a little bit clearer.
Yeah, I think looking at this list, I like who you guys have talked about here, Jaden Reed and Khalil Shakir. I think if I'm going to take a swing at one of these players on this list, I kind of want to just take the biggest swing possible. And for me, that's Puka Nacua. And I think there has to be a situation where it works, right? If I'm 3-0 and the Puka Nacua manager is 0-3 or 1-2 and they're panicking a little bit, I'm making that deal now. And I'm doing everything I can to make sure that my 3-0 team ends up being good down the road as well too, because we know how fast these things can change. And that other manager that's got Puka, who's been on IR, they're probably having a rough season right now, considering how many injuries there are. Just you start to compound one injury on top of another, that manager's probably freaking out a little bit. And I honestly think this is less about the players and more just about knowing your league mates, and having those right scenarios. So if it's, Puka Nacua, if it's T. Higgins, if it's any one of these players that could have a potentially high ceiling, and that fantasy manager has been struggling so far, I want to go and make a trade with them ASAP. All right, guys, before we go to our next tier here, I want to remind everybody we got a bunch of ways you can enjoy this show. One is right here on YouTube. If you're watching, please take a second to like this video, comment down below with maybe a player you think is ranked too high, too low, someone that you think we missed out entirely here, and be sure you're subscribed to the channel because we've got new episodes every day, Monday through Thursday, and then we've got our Sunday morning live start and sit episode here with Jagger May, Joey Wright, Victoria Geary jumps on. Hey, Vic. And then we get all the other Football Guy staffers that jump on as well. So make sure you're subscribed here. Also, we've got the audio side. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify, take a second to please leave a 5-star review. Leave the 5-star review and just tell us that you don't like us. We don't even care what it says on there. Just the 5 stars matters a ton. All right, guys, let's move on to our next tier here. Starting at wide receiver 31, Brian Thomas Jr. At 30, we've got Tank Dell. 29, Rome Odunze. 28, Amari Cooper. 27, Jalen Waddle. 26, Deontay Johnson. 25, Jameson Williams. 24, Cooper Kupp. And at 23, Zay Flowers. So something that stands out to me initially here at the beginning is these rookie wide receivers that we have at the bottom, Rome Odunze and Brian Thomas. These are two guys that we know have some pretty high ceilings. And actually, Victoria and Dave, you guys have these rookies ranked in inverse order. So I'm excited to see what you guys think about them. It's not a big change, but Dave, you're actually lower on the Bear Rome Odunze and you're higher on Brian Thomas. So do you think either of these guys, and let's just, for the sake of this, let's talk about Brian Thomas since you've got him higher. Do you think that he can make that jump into the next tier of wide receivers, especially with how rough it's kind of been for the Jaguars and Trevor Lawrence so far?
Yeah, but I think that bad defense and how it's looked so far in Jacksonville is going to lead to a lot of positive game scripts. We saw it yesterday. Brian Thomas got some garbage time points at the very end of that matchup, and right now on the year he is outscoring Rome Odunze. In a vacuum, Rome Odunze is clearly the better wide receiver. But Trevor Lawrence is now in year 4, year 5. He's a veteran. He still isn't the best quarterback, but we have a little bit more faith in him to lead a prolific passing attack. Caleb Williams has some struggles right now. Rome Odunze still has DJ Moore ahead of him on the depth chart. So, if DJ Moore gets hurt and if Caleb Williams can really figure it out, Rome Odunze obviously has the higher ceiling, but we're already seeing the immediate usage for Brian Thomas. He's essentially operating as the Jaguars wide receiver 1 right now. He's a very good player. Long term, if we're talking dynasty or something like that, clearly prefer Odunze to Brian Thomas, but just given where they each fit in their respective teams, I'm going to prefer Thomas ever so slightly ahead of Odunze for the rest of this season.
There's some good upcoming matchups for both these guys, by the way. Like, this might be the time to go and buy low.
To be fair, the Bears had a good matchup last week, and we saw how that worked out.
Well, yeah, but I mean, Rome Odunze,
it worked out for Rome.
It did.
Yeah, he had himself a great game, and we know that the Jaguars are going to be playing the Colts throughout the season as well. But just looking at the schedule, looking ahead, like both these guys could just be like that plane could just be taking off for them. Vic, let me ask you about Rome Odunze. You've got him ranked higher. You've got him at 28. How likely is it for you that he makes that jump into the next tier?
I think it all depends on the play of Caleb Williams. I mean, we saw flashes in the preseason, and it just hasn't come to fruition yet. But I really think they're going to figure it out. He's way too talented not to. It's just going to take him a step here. And I have Brian Thomas ranked much lower because, I did see a meme just yesterday that said, "Is Trevor Lawrence just Daniel Jones with long blonde hair?" I mean, he's talking about getting benched, potentially. I saw that headline this morning. So it just worries me about BTJ, although, again, the talent is there. But I do think the Bears are going to figure it out here later in the season. And with Keenan Allen missing, all this time, that's just more time for Rome Odunze to strengthen that connection with Caleb Williams.
I just thought it was kind of poetic yesterday. I'm watching this game thinking, how much worse could it possibly get? Like, Trevor Lawrence looks terrible, and then Mac Jones comes out, and his first drop back, the ball gets poked out for a strip sack, and it's like, oh yeah, it could get worse. But yeah, Trevor Lawrence, there's something wrong right now. He just looks broken, and we talked about it last year or this offseason, Alfredo. Like, the first half of last year, Trevor Lawrence looked really good. Like he was leading a good offense. He was on pace for about 4,500 passing yards. Then he picked up that midseason injury and really just fell off in the second half of the season. And I was hoping that he'd be able to bounce back this year. And there's just something off. He really is struggling with pressure, which has always been one of his strengths, is his ability to slide around in the pocket and evade pressure. And now he's taking these really weird sacks that he shouldn't be taking. He's missing open receivers. It is not good for Jacksonville right now.
The vibes are absolutely atrocious in Jacksonville. I think we're understating. Trevor Lawrence has the same number of passing touchdowns as Jordan Love and Tua Tagovailoa. Jordan Love, who has not played since week 1, Tua Tagovailoa, who has missed a game and a half. He's got the same number of passing touchdowns as Malik Willis. So, yeah, that's where the vibes are.
Yeah,
in Jacksonville. It's not great. It's not great. And we talked about this a little bit last time, Dave. Is like, how much of this is on Trevor? How much of this is on the offense? I mean, Mac Jones coming in, I don't necessarily think is the litmus test, but at some point, I don't know that it even matters anymore who it's on. It's just a matter of can the team actually get it going. So I think that's where my only worry is. I only have Rome Odunze one spot ahead of Brian Thomas Jr. I think both of these guys are properly ranked where they're at. I think it's going to take, honestly, an injury for one of these guys to truly jump into the next tier. Their quarterbacks are going to have to either improve their play dramatically, which I don't think happens, or there's going to have to be an injury where just a bunch of targets open up, like we saw with Rome Odunze, where Keenan Allen's not there and he's getting 11 targets in a game. So that's where I'm at with those guys. I want to talk about some of the other players that are here in this tier. Amari Cooper, Jalen Waddle, Deontay Johnson, Jamison Williams, Cooper Kupp, and Zay Flowers. Which one of these wide receivers would you like to have most on your roster for the rest of the season? Victoria, it's a crazy list for us to sit here and have Cooper Kupp anywhere near Jamison Williams, or to have Jalen Waddle down below any of these guys. It's such an odd place that we are only 3 weeks into the season.
This is a really tough question for me in this tier in particular, because Cooper Kupp is the clear answer for me here, but it's the question mark of what is he going to look like when he comes back from this injury. We saw him come back from the same injury last year and just not look the same. He was not giving us that same production, and it made me very sad. So my clear and obvious would be Cooper Kupp if the huge question mark of that injury was not there. Now, I was on this show was it last year, Dave, when we talked about ranking Mr. Adam Thielen? And where would Mr. Adam Thielen be? Because he was just popping off with the Panthers in his production.
Wide receiver 5, I believe, when we were recording this early last season.
Yes, and I see Deontay Johnson just staring me in the face here. And I was in on Deontay Johnson before the season started. I was taking it as a big L for the first 2 weeks, of course, with Bryce Young at the helm there. But Andy Dalton, my little redheaded baby, came in and just lit things on fire. So Deontay Johnson, I think, 8 for 122 and a touchdown. Those targets are going to be there for him. You got Adam Thielen with a little hamstring going on. This is going to be the guy if they keep Andy Dalton slanging that thing in there. So I think it's not upside necessarily, as he's going to have these huge plays every week downfield and all that, but the short to intermediate targets there for Andy Dalton and the touchdown upside, it's looking like it might be up there for him. So I hate saying that, because I do. I love Jamison Williams here. Jalen Waddle, what a travesty here to have him ranked this low. I'm very sorry, Alfredo. But I think I got to go there with Deontay Johnson too.
I like Deontay Johnson a ton. Like, anybody who watches the show knows that I'm a big fan, and what we saw last week was great. I just need to see it one more week before I'm ready to move him way up in the rankings, but he did lead the league in expected fantasy points last week. I mean, his usage was amazing, and we heard that from Dave Canales all offseason, that their passing game was going to run through Deontay Johnson, and when they have a capable quarterback, suddenly we see that he wasn't just blowing smoke. They actually do want to run the offense through Deontay Johnson, but it's still Cooper Kupp for me. We're probably going to be without Cooper Kupp for another 2, maybe 3 weeks, potentially a little bit longer. But Vic, you said that we didn't see it immediately when he came back last year. in his first 2 games back, he had 21 targets and he had 118 yards in the first game, 148 in the second game. It was that second injury that he picked up that really kind of derailed his season after that. But he did bounce back pretty well from the injury initially. Talked with Adam Hutchison about this, our injury analysis here at Football Guys, and he expects Cooper Kupp to come back. He said these high ankle sprains are kind of a death knell for running backs, but they don't affect wide receivers the same way that they affect running backs. So I think this is one of those situations where we know what the ceiling is for Cooper Kupp. We saw the 21 target game in Week 1, and much like we were talking about with the Jaden Reed manager earlier, trying to find an opportunity where you could buy low, or with the Puka Nacua manager, there might be an opportunity here where the Cooper Kupp manager is 1-2 and needs to make some sort of change. So I think realistically and feasibly, Cooper Kupp is the guy that you can probably buy low on right now. And I think that when he comes back, whether it's in week 5, 6, 7, or whatever, we're just going to be looking at immediate wide receiver 1 production again when he does return.
See, that's what worries me, is that we're coming to a conclusion that we're getting the automatic wide receiver 1 production. What worries me most about this injury is that it's a high ankle injury. And this was the same thing that we saw really change the performance and the look of Austin Eckler last year, where he did not look like the same player. And Cooper Kupp, he's no stranger to these injuries. And that's just, Dave, I think we got like the glimpse of what life could be like with a healthy Cooper Kupp, and I'm just worried we're not getting it back. And I don't know, maybe I'm just being a nervous bird here. I'm being a chicken, but I can't rank Cooper Kupp as high as I want to. I want to get him up there at like where you have him at 21. I've got him at 30. I can't quite do it. For me, I think the obvious answer would be Zay Flowers on the Ravens, but I think for conversation's sake here, I want to talk about Jamison Williams, who I've got ranked at 24 and the wide receivers here. And we've got Sam Laporta, who leaves the game with an injury, and that's something that he's going to be dealing with for a little bit. I think that we've just kind of reached the point with the Lions where they have so many weapons that defenses can't focus in on just one guy. They can't just try and stop the running game to beat this team. They can't just stop Amon-Ra St. Brown to stop. Did I say it correctly? No. Amon-Ra St. Brown. There we go. We have a commenter who lets me know I don't speak proper Egyptian. But yeah, it's Jamison Williams has proven that he can make plays out in the open field. He can make plays even when he's covered and get separation. I just don't think that the 9 targets and 11 targets in back-to-back weeks like that all of a sudden goes away. We did have the one bad game here, right? They just couldn't get on target. There was a lot that was going on wrong with Jared Goff in that game, but I do still think that Jamison Williams has shown he can take on some target volume. He can continue to make plays. And I think we're just sort of scratching the surface. I think that playbook is going to continue to open up a bit more for Jamison Williams as the season goes on. Let's go to our next tier here, guys. So starting at wide receiver 22, we've got DJ Moore. Wide receiver 21, Brandon Ayuk. Wide receiver 20, Stephon Diggs. Wide receiver 19, Devontae Adams. Wide receiver 18 is Mike Evans. Wide receiver 17 is Devontae Smith. At wide receiver 16, it's Drake London. Wide receiver 15 is Deebo Samuel. At wide receiver 14, it is Garrett Wilson. And wide receiver 13 is Chris Olave. So let's start at the bottom of this tier. Because, Dave, I'm really nervous about Brandon Ayuk. He's making me feel gross. And he's got all of us believing, and no shade, but believing that Jawan Jennings is a must-start wide receiver from here on out, and a guy that people are going to go and spend a lot of fab on, and perhaps rightfully so for, a couple weeks here while Deebo's out. But what do we see going forward for Brandon Ayuk? Is he just going to be the de facto wide receiver 3 on this team when Deebo and George Kittle are back, and Christian McCaffrey too? Like, how bad could this get? Or is he a guy that we want to go out and buy low?
I'm going to ask you to think way, way back, Alfredo. 2021 feels like a lifetime ago. 2021, off season, we were all going goo goo gaga over Brandon Ayuk. If you remember, he had that late season push at the end of his rookie year where he looked like a dominant wide receiver 1, and going into year 2, everybody wanted to draft Brandon Ayuk, and he was going about 4 rounds ahead of Deebo Samuel in drafts that year. And then the season started and Brandon Ayuk just wasn't getting the usage that we wanted to see. And everyone was kind of scratching their head saying, what's going on? Like, this is one of the best receivers in the NFL. Why isn't he getting premier usage? Well, all the touches were going Deebo Samuel's way. I can't help but feel like Kyle Shanahan is a little bit petty at times, and he will kind of punish his players. And we saw in week 1, Brandon Ayuk came out with his normal target share. He pulled 10 targets in that game, and he had some concentration issues. He had a
You
route that
mean
he
week
gave up
3?
on. What was that?
You mean week 3? He had the 10 targets.
Oh yeah, sorry. In week 3, yeah,
Yeah.
week 1 he came out. He had the 5 targets in week 1.
Yeah.
Had some concentration issues. Gave up on a route, and it just seems like the usage hasn't been there since. What we saw in this game in week 3 was a much shorter target depth, where they were trying to feed him some targets, but the big boy routes, the valuable routes that were coming deep downfield, which were Brandon Ayuk's routes previously, were now going to Juwan Jennings. So I can't help but think maybe Brandon Ayuk has ended up back in Kyle Shanahan's doghouse like he was in 2021, where some of the offseason drama, the not showing up to camp, the concentration issues that we saw in week 1, maybe Ayuk is getting punished for some of these things now. I mean, if he can't do it with no Christian McCaffrey, no George Kittle, and no Debo Samuel, I'm concerned for what it's going to look like when those guys are back in the fold, if they are at some point. You know, George Kittle's already back at practice. Debo Samuel probably going to miss another week, but should be back in week 5. And I'm kind of nervous about what Brandon Ayuk is going to look like here. So you're looking at this guy as a potential top 10, top 12 receiver in drafts, but I'm kind of viewing him as like a fringe wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3 right now. And still putting him in my lineups because we know the upside is there, but can't help but think that maybe Kyle Shanahan is just a little upset at some of the drama that happened this offseason, and he's punishing Ayuk for it now.
I don't know that I'm on the same page with you there, that he's punishing. Like, I don't, getting 10 targets in a game to me is not punishing someone. It's just, I just don't think he's on the same page as his quarterback right now. I think the conditioning's not quite there. I think missing all of training camp and OTAs, like, yeah, that'll do it. That'll do it. And so right now he's 3 games into the season. It's usually what you're getting out of a preseason or what you're getting throughout training camp. And I do think we'll see him get there. It is worrisome though. And that's why we all have him as a low end wide receiver too, is that there was no George Kittle. There was no Christian McCaffrey. There was no Debo Samuel. And instead of Ayuk just having even a reasonable game, we get a historical game from Juwan Jennings. Like, it's nuts. It almost seems like anything else will happen except for a good Brandon Ayuk game. But I think we can remain patient.
And last
There's
year,
two
you know,
other,
this guy led
yeah,
the league in yards per target and yards per reception. His average target depth was coming nearly 14 yards downfield. And like I said, we've just seen a change in usage in the last 2 weeks. His average target depth has been in these single digits. So last year, I think what made him so valuable, we knew that it wasn't huge usage. It was that the targets he was getting were so valuable because they were coming deep downfield. They were on these crossers that coming across the middle of the field where he was able to pick up yards after the catch. And that's exactly what we saw Juwan Jennings do yesterday. Well, Brandon Ayuk is running more of the low value underneath routes, and he doesn't have the same after the catch abilities that Debo Samuel has. So I just don't like the role that I'm seeing Ayuk in right now. It's not the same role that made him so efficient last year.
yeah. I mean, I do think that's just for week 3. I do think that's because of the circumstances of not having Debo there, and they sort of shifted guys around. But anyways, we can digress. We do this all the time. We are literally 2 spots different on Brandon Ayuk, and it sounds like we're 50 spots different.
But we're both a lot lower than we were in the preseason. And I think
Yes.
that's the big takeaway is that,
Yeah.
you know, we all, you know, I'm not saying, you know, you're lower or I'm lower at this point. It's that we have both dropped him about 10 spots from our preseason rankings after just 3 weeks, which is a pretty significant change.
Yeah. Yeah. I still think he could be a buy low. I think that fantasy manager is pretty done with him. But I want to go to 2 other wide receivers here in this tier. It's 2 of the older wide receivers. They're both 31 years old. And Victoria, I'm worried that we might be seeing the beginning of the end for Mike Evans and Devontae Adams, 2 guys that uh, Dave and I really didn't change much on Devontae Adams. Dave, I know you already had him at like wide receiver 19, and he's at wide receiver 20 for you, but Mike Evans is a guy that we had a little bit higher, and now he's going down just ever so slightly. We see 2 single digit fantasy point games from these guys, and each of them get a 20-point fantasy point blow up here in the season. But it has not looked good. The offense just doesn't seem to be revolving around these 2 wide receivers like it has in the past. So how worried are you about Mike Evans and Devontae Adams?
I think it's a little bit more Jover for Mike Evans, I would have to say, because week 1, his blow up game, he had 2 touchdowns in this game. Still 6 targets, he had 61 yards, and that's fine, but look out Chris Godwin. Chris Godwin is the guy for Baker Mayfield and this offense. And I think Mike Evans, if he doesn't have, this is what we're seeing week 2 and 3. If he doesn't have that touchdown upside, it's just not there for him. We kind of saw that last year too, although he was scoring obviously a lot more. I'm less worried about Devontae Adams, although like the sideline antics there and how unhappy he looks is a little worrisome. I think if Pierce could not want to say he wants to run the ball with Zamir White 20 times a game, if he could just wake up a little bit and understand that that's not a winning recipe here. I mean,
Well, the crazy thing is that they're not even doing that. The Raiders have been one of the most
Yeah.
pass-heavy teams in the league. He just keeps saying, I want to get Zamir White 20 touches, and then gives Alexander Madison more touches. Like the
right.
offense doesn't make sense right now.
Right. And they're talking about the potential quarterback change there. I don't know how much that's going to help either. I just think they have to feed their guys. They have to feed Devontae Adams. They have to feed Brock Bowers. I mean, I'm seeing Jacoby Myers in the end zone last weekend. I wasn't seeing enough targets to Adams and Bowers. And I think they'll figure that out as the season goes on. So I'm a lot less worried about Devontae. I think he has a higher ceiling than Evans, in my opinion here.
Yeah, I'm still lean. I don't want to be completely out on Mike Evans because we've seen this before where he gets off to slow starts and then he always just finishes the season with 1,000 yards and 10 touchdowns. Like it's I don't want to say that I'm completely out on Mike Evans yet. This Tampa Bay offense looks a lot better currently than the Las Vegas offense does. So I've got Evans slightly ahead of Devontae Adams, but yeah, both of these guys have moved down a little bit from our preseason rankings where I was already pretty low on both of these guys. I don't want to say it's the beginning of the end. We have written off Mike Evans and Devontae Adams for years now, and they continue producing. But with Chris Godwin kind of resuscitating his career and looking like the guy that we saw 3-4 years ago, Brock Bowers in the mix now, taking some targets away from Devontae Adams. I don't feel great about either of these guys. They're still going to have their occasional blow up games, but I think we have them pretty accurately ranked where they belong, kind of in the back half of the wide receiver 2 discussion.
Yeah, I don't necessarily want to write these guys off, but I'm getting a little panicky. Like if we were doing the panic meter episode, it would be pretty high right now for Mike Evans. It's the fact that he's got the lowest yardage per game so far of his career, lowest yards per target over the last 7 years, and then just the 5 targets per game right now. I think that's what's worrying me the most. At least Devontae is getting his targets. Whether they're all hitting or not, the volume still seems to be there for Devontae just because simply the Raiders don't have anything else. The emergence of Chris Godwin and how comfortable it has made Baker Mayfield does worry me a little bit. I don't necessarily think that means we're getting a bad Mike Evans. I just think that the days of him being that top 12 fantasy wide receiver are probably gone. We're probably closer just looking at a guy that finishes top 24, and you need to be happy with that essentially. But it does stink if this was a guy that you were drafting to be top 12. Like it's just not going to match the value that you drafted him for. All right, let's go to our wow. Guys, we're doing this so fast. I'm really proud of us today. Let's go to our second to last tier here, where we're going to go through wide receivers 12 through 6. At 12, we've got AJ Brown. At 11, Chris Godwin. At 10, DK Metcalf. At 9, Tyreek Hill. At 8, Marvin Harrison Jr. 7, Nico Collins. And at 6, incredible rookie Malik Neighbors. So my first question is this. Dave, why do you hate AJ Brown?
Well, he's hurt. I mean, it's as simple as that. He's hurt. This is the same.
So when I get hurt, you're going to hate me too?
I mean, if I was relying on you for fantasy points and you were giving me 0 for a handful of weeks, yeah, I wouldn't like it. I mean, this is the same conversation we had last week doing the quarterback show with Jordan Love, and you guys were giving me all sorts of grief for being low on Jordan Love in my rest of season quarterback rankings. I want people who are scoring points. AJ Brown isn't scoring points right now. It's been kind of a mysterious injury. He picked it up in the middle of the week. I believe it was like a Thursday practice that he just popped up limited, didn't practice the next day. Then all of a sudden before the Monday night kickoff, he tells Lisa Salters that he's probably going to be out for a few weeks. Hamstring injuries linger. Like this isn't one of those things where, he tweaked his hamstring. He's going to miss a game and then he'll be back to 100%. He can miss 3 games. He can miss 4 games. He can miss 5 games. He can be limited when he returns. He's got a risk of re-injury. I mean, there's a lot of red flags beeping with AJ Brown right now. If he was healthy, he'd be ahead of Malik Neighbors. I'd have him as my wide receiver 6 in the elite tier of receivers, but he's not healthy. And it's just as simple as that. We don't know when he's coming back. We don't know how he'll perform when he does return. It's tough for me to put an injured player inside my top 10.
I will tell you what you're wrong about immediately. Red flags don't beep. And that's what you said. Yeah, I get it. Like, I understand not wanting to rank a player high because of injury if he's going to be out for a couple weeks. Looking at it like this, though, right? He misses week 3. He'll miss week 4 against Tampa, and then they've got a bye in week 5. And right now, the projected timetable for return is week 6. So if a guy's going to be back in week 6, and he was already a guy that we pretty much always had in our top 5 amongst wide receivers, I don't want to drop him too much for missing these games. Now, it's all going to be very fluid. It has to be fluid based on the reports that we get. If he's going to miss more time, yes, I agree. Put him at wide receiver 14 like you have him. I still have him at wide receiver 8. Vic, you're the perfect middleman right here. You've got him at wide receiver 11, and you, I guess, seem to still be the most level-headed on A.J. Brown amongst the two of us. So that makes me want to ask you a question about a wide receiver that I'm just confused about, and I think most people are going to be confused about going forward. At number 9, we have Tyreek Hill, and I don't know what to do with Tyreek Hill. I don't know what to do. If you watch that Miami Dolphins game, quarterback situation is bad. They're not even manufacturing touches for Tyreek like I would have expected. The Miami Dolphins offense is statistically the worst in the league. They have held one lead, and it was at the end of the game when they beat the Jacksonville Jaguars for the final second of that game. They have actually scored less points than the Carolina Panthers this season. I'm worried about Tyreek Hill. I don't know what to do. What do we do here?
Panic.
Absolutely, that was going to be my answer. Just wave the white flag at this point. No, I'm kidding.
Why do we have him so high then? Like,
that was actually going to be my first point. Like, I struggled putting him this. I didn't want to put him this high, and I wish I edited that this morning because it's terrifying what's going on there.
We do these things live. Let's go ahead. How would we change this, guys? How would we change this? Because right now, Tyreek Hill is our wide receiver 9. Dave, he's your wide receiver 9. He's my 11. Victoria, he's your 10. How would we change this as we talk through this here?
So here's kind of my thought process. I ranked him as wide receiver 9, and I guess you can say that's sort of a placeholder with the hope that Tua Tagovailoa is going to return at some point. Like if he comes out back from IR, comes back in the game, I think that's why I'm still holding on to some hope. But if you tell me that it is going to be Tim Boyle starting for the rest of the season or Skylar Thompson starting for the rest of the season, Tyreek Hill probably falls to about wide receiver 20 for me. I mean, the splits that we've seen in Miami with and without Tua Tagovailoa, averaging 23 points per game with Tua, averaging less than 15 points per game without Tua, it was horrendous last week. I mean, the Skylar Thompson play was some of the worst quarterback play I've ever seen in my life. Tim Boyle then comes in after the Skylar Thompson injury and looks even worse. And it has just hurt everybody in this offense. And I talked about it. I do my weekly 3 up, 3 down article. Now, Alfredo, plug your ears. You're not going to want to hear this, but one of my 3 downs this week was just the Miami Dolphins, the entire team. I mean, we saw Devon Achane still had his workhorse role, 16 touches, and he got 58 scoreless scrimmage yards. Jalen Waddle, Tyreek Hill, 4 receptions each for 40 and 26 yards. The team didn't score a touchdown. And the worst thing about Tyreek Hill is you don't want to sell low on him. Like I'm in a league where somebody was sending me offers. They're Tyreek Hill and they wanted Nico Collins, and I turned that down. And then, they offered me Rashad White and Khalil Shakir, and I turned that down. Like I don't want to buy low on a guy who has such a weird future ahead of him that we don't know what to expect. But then again, it's Tyreek Hill, and you want to put him in your lineup because he could take a screen pass 80 yards to the house and pay off on any given week. So as it stands right now, I mean, Christian McCaffrey is probably the worst pick because we don't know what's going on with him. But Tyreek Hill is easily the second worst pick you could have made in fantasy football right now because you got to keep playing him. Like at least with Christian McCaffrey, you can put him in your IR spot, pick somebody else up, and stop the bleeding by putting somebody else in your lineup. With Tyreek Hill, you still got to put him in, and you might just be getting 2 or 3 catches for 30 yards every single week without any touchdowns.
You see, my thought process is that if we're going to ding AJ Brown for missing games, we kind of have to ding Tyreek Hill for the same thing. It's not that he's missing games, but without his quarterback, like I'd almost rather him be injured because, like you said, we have to start him, and then you start him and you get 3 points. And with Tua on IR, we're getting at least a minimum of 4 bad weeks from Tyreek Hill. Like I would rather just know. I'd rather know what's going on and be there. Like I have Tyreek ranked below AJ Brown. Victoria, I want to do this with you. Let's see how you would adjust your rankings here as we go along. So you've got Tyreek as your wide receiver 10. AJ Brown is your wide receiver 11. Would you keep Tyreek ahead of AJ Brown or no?
Honestly, I'm looking at the tier we just talked about. You've got Olave, Garrett Wilson, Debo, Jake London, Devontae Smith. Then you've got the Mike Evans and Devontae Adams. Does he slot as low as the guys we just talked about, Mike Evans and Devontae Adams? If you knew Tua was out the rest of the season, at a minimum, that is where I would be putting him. And I understand the high upside for that one play, but that one play is not happening if they keep rolling out this offense. So I feel like I'd have to drop him if I knew Tua was going to be out, which honestly, guys, he should
Might be.
be, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
So that's as far as I would drop him there, and that's kind of terrifying to say that.
I think the thing that makes Tyreek such a polarizing player right now, and where to rank him in rest of season rankings, is the possibility that Tua does return in 3 weeks. And if he does, then Tyreek Hill is immediately, a top two receiver in fantasy. So I think that's kind of the concern. I mean, comparing him to AJ Brown, I understand, but like AJ Brown's ceiling isn't going to be as high as Tyreek Hill's ceiling, and that's what makes it so tough. Like you don't want to sell low, you don't want to buy low, you don't want to bench him, you can't put him in an IR spot. You just have to keep putting him out in your lineup and hoping that he can make that one big play. We just kind of glanced over Jalen Waddle earlier in the show, and we talked about him way down in our rankings as well. It's the same thing for Jalen Waddle. Like you still want to put him in as your wide receiver 2 or your flex, but his floor and ceiling are even lower than Tyreek Hill's right now. Same goes for Devon Achane. And I know this is a wide receiver show. Like you still want to start these Miami Dolphins players because they are so talented, but you could just be looking at duds from any of these three on any given week. It's just a terrible spot to be in.
Yeah, right
I,
now
I
the
feel like we
Dolphins-
need to give some actionable advice here, like what you should do, but like I
that's
genuinely don't know. Like you're screwed.
Can
well,
you
I mean,
still
right.
use him as name value for your trades? I mean, I
That's
would
that's what I
be,
was gonna say.
yeah.
Yeah, that's
That's
what I was gonna say. Like
exactly what I would be doing.
I'm willing to trade low because what does a sell low look like for Tyreek Hill? Can I sell low? Can I sell Tyreek Hill right now for let's throw out some names here. Can I sell him for Drake London?
Probably not. I think most people are going to prefer Drake London. That's what, like, there's
Okay.
a guy in
Can
a league
I
that I'm in, a very competitive, high stakes league, and somebody put Tyreek Hill on the trade block, and he was trying to get, first, second, and third round players in return, and nobody was
oh,
biting. Like,
that's not
nobody
yeah, that's
wanted,
not gonna
like,
happen.
the only way people are buying Tyreek Hill is if they can do it for super, super cheap. But the person who drafted Tyreek Hill doesn't want to sell for super, super cheap. So it's just kind of this stalemate where I feel like the idea of trading Tyreek Hill sounds great, but I don't know how often you're actually going to see it happen.
Okay, two things. One, I figured out the perfect trade. Now I'll mention that in a moment. But right now, the Dolphins wide receivers are totally the meme of Dennis in It's Always Sunny, where he's just like, I can go lower. Like that's the floor for them right now. Is just imagining these two guys in their cut off jean shorts. I can go lower. Because that's honestly like that's where the floor is for these guys for fantasy, especially with Skylar Thompson and Tim Boyle come on, the offense looks awful right now. Let's do
Mike
this.
White is out there, but he's on the Bills, and like the Bills aren't going to
Yeah,
trade
we
Mike
can't get
White
him.
in their division. Yeah, like I don't know what the answer is here. Like, do you swing
I
for the
would
fences and hope
I
that
would
Dallas is willing
trade.
to trade Trey Lance? Like, what do you
Oh,
do at
stop.
this point?
That's gross. I
We
would
can't
trade
go there.
Tyreek Hill right now for Brandon Ayuk. Is that a trade that gets done?
Yeah,
That's
it might be one of those where both sides lose, but yeah, you
it.
That's
might
fine.
get that
That's
trade
fine.
done.
I'd rather lose with Brandon Ayuk knowing that it's a good offense that has its quarterback and he's probably just getting his legs under him. I think that's the trade I'm making.
I think you could get that done. I think you
Yeah,
could get that trade
I think
done
We
for
did
sure.
Stephon Diggs is maybe another one that you might be interested, like selling Tyreek Hill for Stephon Diggs. I think there's
Week
still
3, and we're talking about selling Tyreek Hill for these guys. It's actually very
Welcome to the
significant.
show.
yeah,
Oh,
it's
That's
not
right.
fun.
All right, let's go to the last player I want to talk about in this tier here, and it's Malik Neighbors. Malik Neighbors, who Dave, you and I both have him ranked as wide receiver 7. Victoria, you are doing all of the propping. You are that meme of the Pope holding up the body of Christ right now, and it's just Malik Neighbors in your hands because right now you've got Malik Neighbors as your wide receiver 2 overall for the rest of the season. And I mean, for good reason. Right now, Malik Neighbors has joined Anquan Bolden and Puka Nakua as the only rookie wide receivers to have at least 20 receptions and 3 touchdowns in their first 3 games. Now, the question here, and Victoria, I think I know your answer, but I want to ask it anyways, is how sustainable is this current streak for him? Because what we're seeing is nuts. We're seeing a near 40% target share. He is the entire offense. And I think we might be seeing the best passing efficiency of Daniel Jones' career. Like how sustainable is this?
I mean, is his 2 touchdown production from this last week sustainable? Probably not, but this man is single-handedly saving Daniel Jones'
Yeah.
entire career.
Yeah.
He's bringing joy back into Giants fans' lives everywhere. Okay, so in their upcoming schedule, I don't see them ever being in a situation where they're leading in a game. These guys, Danny Dimes, he's going to have to keep throwing the ball. They've got the Cowboys, Seahawks, Bengals, Eagles. I mean, you name it. This whole schedule, they're going to have to be throwing the ball. And you already mentioned it, Alfredo. This target share for Neighbors is absolutely bonkers. 38% target share of every player on the offense, not just wide receivers, but wide receivers a 51% target share. It's unreal. This kind of volume is crazy. And it's not the volume might not be there every single week, but he is the guy. The offense is running fully through Malik Neighbors. And this kind of target share is so valuable for fantasy. You're not seeing that kind of consistency for some of our other higher tier guys here. I know I'm a little bit too high on him, but I like it. I'm keeping him here.
I
Yeah.
don't think you're too high. I mean, if there's anything like I've learned over the years, it's that when a rookie comes onto the scene and does things like this, you need to be quickly to adjust and move him up the rankings. And I've got him at wide receiver 7, and it almost feels too low. And it's crazy to think that, like, am I putting him ahead of Nico Collins and Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson? But he kind of falls into that tier for me. Everything you said, the 38% target share is unbelievable, and I don't expect that to come down. Like, he is going to continue doing this, and he has checked every single box you want to see from a alpha wide receiver. He's doing deep downfield, complicated routes. He's making contested catches. He's showing the sideline awareness with the toe taps. He's being a bully after the catch. He's scoring touchdowns. He's drawing the targets. Like, he's doing everything you want to see from a wide receiver. So I think we were all smart to quickly adjust here and move up. Like, this isn't some random guy, maybe last year with Adam Thielen, we got a little over our skis when we saw like a year 8 guy getting off to a really hot start. This isn't some year 8 guy who's popping up out of nowhere. This is a highly touted rookie who is doing everything we expected of him and then some. And, you start looking at the historical comps. It's Anquan Bolden, who had the greatest rookie season of all time until it was passed up by Puka Nacua, who had the greatest rookie season of all time. And now Malik Neighbors is pacing with those two guys. So it's not crazy to think that the outcome for Malik Neighbors in 2024 is the greatest rookie season of all time, which is likely going to give him a top 5 fantasy finish.
Dave, I've got him ranked in the same spot as you. And it's so funny because we're looking through different colored glasses here. I feel like I have to put him at wide receiver 7 because of what he's doing, right? And we could have, like you said, we could have a player that everything looks totally different. He's a Puka Nacua, and this is going to be a historical wide receiver rookie season. And honestly, I think it might be as well. But I do
All
think
3
that
of us already have him ahead of Marvin Harrison, which I was surprised by.
Yeah.
I thought there'd still be somebody holding on to hope that Marvin Harrison was the class's wide receiver 1, but all of us have seen enough through week 3 that we're putting Neighbors ahead of Harrison.
Yeah, I mean, we've got him close. I mean, you've got him 7 and 8. I've got him 7 and 9. Vic, never mind. You've got him at 2 and 12. So there's a bit of a gap.
Whoops,
But
that was an accident.
So like I would say this, like I do want to keep my pants on when talking about Malik Neighbors because like they're not going to be going up against the Washington Commanders and the Cleveland Browns, whose defense has not looked good this season. We did see week 1 going up against the Minnesota Vikings, who have looked fantastic. And the Giants offense was very, very different. Malik Neighbors had 5 catches for 66 yards and he looked human.
This is his first game ever, Alfredo.
Dude, relax. I'm not saying that
Give the kid a break.
Let me finish the sentence. I'm saying we're not going to see him going up against the easiest defenses in the league week after week after week. I do think we are going to see a few down games here and there, but we're going to continue to have the big explosive games that we've seen so far. All right, Dave, can you keep your pants on? Yeah.
Oh, they've been off as soon as we started talking about Neighbors. I threw him out the window.
Okay. Did you make a messy on the backside? Is that what happened?
Oh dear.
All right, let's go to the next tier. At wide receiver 5, we got Jamar Chase. At 4, Justin Jefferson. At 3, get ready, folks, Rashee Rice. At number 2, CeeDee Lamb. And at number 1, Amon-Ra St. Brown. And here's the caveat, is that 1, 2, and 3, 1, 2, 3, and 4 are all actually tied across the board in our consensus ranking. So Amon-Ra St. Brown, CeeDee Lamb, Rashee Rice, and Justin Jefferson are all tied as the top wide receiver in fantasy football for the rest of the season. So let's talk about this right now. Victoria, you have Rashee Rice as your number 1 wide receiver. And I think most people might be surprised with Rashee Rice at 1, Malik Neighbors at 2. I think you've done a great job defending the Malik Neighbors at 2. Talk to us about Rashee Rice here as your wide receiver 1 overall.
This was hard. I actually, when I was ranking yesterday, I didn't have a number 1. I couldn't decide for a really long time. And Rashee Rice has just, the value we got on Rashee Rice because of all the legal stuff going on. This guy would have been a first round pick without all of that noise, right? And for so long, the Chiefs offense, the man of the hour has been Travis Kelce. And the story every offseason before this was the Chiefs wide receiver 1 is Travis Kelce. Don't try to draft a Chiefs wide receiver to be the star for your fantasy team. We get this false hope every season, right? So now the roles are completely reversed. This man is being fed every week, and I'm sure just absolutely ticking off fantasy managers everywhere, going against him every week, just throwing themselves at a wall, screaming that this man should probably be in trouble, maybe behind bars. But instead, he's here, beating us mercilessly in these fantasy matchups every week. The volume he's getting, the looks that he's getting. I know that Andy Reid mentioned in a post-game interview that he's just doing his thing and defenses might hone in on him more in these upcoming weeks. But I mean, what are you going to do? What are you going to do?
He can hit Xavier Worthy for a 70-yard shot downfield? Yeah,
exactly.
You can't. Yeah.
Like, there are too many options, and Kelce's still there. I mean, right? He's still there. He's still going to get his in these coming weeks, but
he is physically there.
Yeah, that's fair. I gave him too much credit. I take it back. But yeah, I don't see anything slowing down for Rashee Rice. He's just on fire, and he's the guy. And he's not, I don't know, he's not just slant boy here, right? He's getting things done. So I think the upside is there. I mean, my second, I would have said Amon-Ra St. Brown, but I just see it for Rashee going forward.
Yeah, dude, I'm with it. I got Rashee Rice as my wide receiver 2, and I could have easily put him as wide receiver 1. I don't think people know, Alfredo, we talked about Rashee Rice a ton last year, like early in the season, where we were saying, like, on this very small snap share. If you remember early in the season, he was seeing like 30, 40, 50% of the snaps, but his per route run usage was mind-blowing, where we were saying, like, on a per route run basis, this guy's basically CeeDee Lamb and Jamar Chase. Like, he's doing amazing things. Like, if his snap share grows a little bit, he is going to break fantasy football. And then it was week 12 last year. He saw his role grow. He became a full-time player. And I looked at it. We're looking at a nine-game sample after their bye last year, after their bye, the rest of the season, through the playoffs, and into this year. He is averaging 19.8 fantasy points per game. He's averaging 9.4 targets per game. I mean, he has just been unstoppable. Now you've got an aging Travis Kelce. You've got no Hollywood Brown. Xavier Worthy and Rashee Rice operate in completely different parts of the field, making them very good complementary pieces for each other. I went back and what Rashee Rice has done over his last 9 games, if we extrapolate that over a full season, he would have been a top 5 wide receiver in all but 2 seasons in NFL history. And one of those was in 1995. And that was just like peak football, where Jerry Rice, Isaac Bruce, Herman Moore, Chris Carter, Robert Brooks, Michael Irvin all kind of went crazy. He'd have been the wide receiver 8 in that year. Outside of that, he's a top 3, top 5 wide receiver in almost every season in NFL history with the production that he's currently giving us. So I think a lot of people still want to knock Rashee Rice for, one, some of the offseason shenanigans that he got into, and 2, he was pretty limited in what he did as a rookie. But now in year 2, we're seeing him run go routes. We're seeing him run post deep downfield. We're seeing his usage change a little bit. Now that he's a little bit more of a versatile route runner, it's just giving him an even higher ceiling. I've got him as my wide receiver 2 for the rest of the season, but I don't think it's crazy at all to say that he is the most valuable wide receiver in fantasy football right now.
I think there's a case to be made for all these guys. I think there's a case to be
Yeah.
made for all four of these players that we put here. And the one player that none of us put at wide receiver 1, which is kind of crazy, is Justin Jefferson. I have him highest at wide receiver 2. You both have him as a wide receiver 4. And I think there's just as much case to be made for him as the wide receiver 1 amongst these players. The guy I ended up going with was CeeDee Lamb. And it's simply because there's not something that's missing from this equation. He's not injured. Dak Prescott's not injured or missing. This is still the same everything. What we're seeing here is just a failure to communicate. And in this past game, we saw some, like, CeeDee Lamb was pissed. CeeDee Lamb was losing it on the sideline with Dak Prescott, with coaches, with teammates. Like, there's jokes that he's entering his Dez Bryant era now with the Cowboys. It's very possible, right? And like, I can't try to analyze the intangibles like that. But what I will say is this: is that teams with players like this do tend to course correct pretty quickly. The Cowboys are struggling right now early in the season. They know which side of their bread is buttered, and it's getting the ball to CeeDee Lamb. It's passing the ball over and over and over. This is a team, an offense that has not had a run of greater than 10 yards this season. In fact, the only rushing play of longer than 10 yards was CeeDee Lamb. So this Cowboys offense absolutely needs to keep utilizing CeeDee Lamb. Looking back at the last couple of games, Dave, it's super disappointing to see CeeDee Lamb with 4 catches, 5 catches. The targets are somewhat there, but still not really. Week 4 here, there should be a get-right game against the New York Giants. You've got Pittsburgh in the following week after that, the Detroit Lions, a bye week. There's a lot of opportunity going forward. And honestly, CeeDee Lamb, and I'm mentioning opponents, CeeDee Lamb, Dak Prescott, and the Cowboys passing offense is not one that we have to look at and say they are matchup dependent. This Cowboys defense has not been nearly as good as it's been in years past. The team's going to continue to have to pass the ball. And there's a player that I want to depend on that's going to continue to get volume, has the talent to do something with that volume. It's CeeDee Lamb for me. He remains my wide receiver 1.
I get it. And you just got to wonder like how much a lack of a secondary option is inhibiting CeeDee Lamb's production at this point. I mean, they've been without Jake Ferguson, and I think that
Well, he
Jake
was back last
Ferguson
week.
he wasn't 100% though. And I think that, once we see, because like Brandon Cooks is not playing as good as he did last year, we see them trying to kind of elevate Jalen Tolbert into this role. Jake Ferguson hasn't been 100% this year. And you got to wonder how much that is hurting CeeDee Lamb short term because teams are able to double team him. Once a secondary option can step up and be kind of a threat, then you can't focus on CeeDee Lamb quite as much. It's been frustrating, but I think this CeeDee Lamb is one of those guys that like we absolutely can't overreact to, and we've all got him inside our top 5. I think that what he's done through his NFL career tells us much more than what has happened through the first 3 games of this season. So certainly not panicking on CeeDee Lamb. I think that it's totally warranted to have him as the overall wide receiver 1. I think you're right though. Situations like this do tend to course correct quickly, and whether it's Brandon Cook stepping up, Jalen Tolbert, Jake Ferguson, whatever it is, I think having a secondary option there in Dallas will just help CeeDee get back on track.
Well, we did it. And we did it in a timely fashion. We went through 38 wide receivers here. A whole bunch of tiers that we got. Dave, you and I are going to be back again tomorrow and the next day. And then you'll be back the next day after that with Jeff.
And the
But
next
Victoria,
day, and the next day, and the next day, just Groundhog's Day for 17 weeks.
well, I will not be here on Saturday. I don't know about you. I'm not going to be on the YouTube channel on Saturday. But Victoria, thank you so much for coming on with us. We're going to have you back again later on in the year. We're going to redo this again in a few weeks and take a look at how the wide receivers have changed once again. But you were awesome. And everyone that's been watching and listening, you guys are awesome. We honestly cannot do this without you. We've been seeing the reviews on Apple Podcasts. We've been seeing the comments, and we are so appreciative of it. It seriously just means the world to us. And for myself, for Dave, for Victoria, and for everyone at Football Guys, we want to thank you guys for watching and listening here today. We'll see you next time. Adios.